It's all over for now, including the shouting. Night 2 of the second Democratic debate finished moments ago in the city of Detroit. We have now heard from fully 20 Democrats, though not all the Democrats running. And again tonight, we saw a split among the party members. Tonight saw attacks on the last Democratic president, oddly, largely because Obama's vice president was there on the stage. Joe Biden, as predicted, attracted a lot of attention, as did Senator Kamala Harris. Here is how the evening got started.
Cozy on me, kid. You good?
Once we got underway, health care was a main topic of the night, and it caused a clash between Biden and Harris.
This idea is a bunch of malarkey, what we're talking about here. The fact of the matter is that there will be a deductible. It will be a deductible in their paycheck. Bernie acknowledges it. $30 trillion has to ultimately be paid. And I don't know what math you do in New York. I don't know what math you do anywhere in California, but I tell you, that's a lot of money. And there will be a deductible. The deductible will be out of your paycheck because that's what will be required.
Let's talk about math. Let's talk about the fact that the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies last year alone profited $72 billion. And that is on the backs of American families. And under your plan, status quo, you do nothing to hold the insurance companies to task for what they have been doing to American families.
I have the only plan that limits the ability of insurance companies to charge unreasonable prices, flat out.
From there, the attacks on Biden continued on a number of fronts, including this exchange with Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, who alternated tonight between warning Democrats not to attack each other and also attacking Joe Biden.
Mr. Vice President, you can't have it both ways. You invoke President Obama more than anybody in this campaign. You can't do it when it's convenient and then dodge it when it's not. And the second thing, and this really irks me because I heard the Vice President say that, if you got a PhD, you can come right into this country. Well, that's playing into what the Republicans want, to pit some immigrants against other immigrants. Some are from shithole countries and some are from worthy countries. We need to reform this whole immigration system and begin to be the country that says everyone has worth and dignity, and this should be a country that honors for everyone. Don't let the Republicans divide this party against itself.
And yes, we believe Booker now goes into the books as the first one to swear during a presidential debate. On the issue of immigration, there was this back and forth between Biden and former Obama Housing Secretary Julian Castro.
The fact of the matter is, you should be able to, if you cross the border illegally, you should be able to be sent back. It's a crime. It's a crime, and it's not one that, in fact...
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Secretary Castro, please respond.
First of all, Mr. Vice President, it looks like one of us has learned the lessons of the past, and one of us hasn't. Let me begin by telling you... Let me just start out by answering that question. My immigration plan would also fix the broken legal immigration system, because we do have a problem with that. Secondly, the only way that we're going to guarantee that these kinds of family separations don't happen in the future is that we need to repeal this law. What we need are politicians that actually have some guts on this issue.
And on the topic of busing, that came up again in this second round of debates. And after Biden and Harris addressed the issue separately, Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado offered his take.
This is the fourth debate that we have had, and the second time that we have been debating what people did 50 years ago with busing, when our schools are as segregated today as they were 50 years ago. We need a conversation about what's happening now. And when there's a group of kids in this country that don't get preschool through no fault of their own, and another group does, equal is not equal.
And near the end of the debate, Senator Harris was asked about last week's testimony from Robert Mueller.
We all watched his testimony. I read the report. There are 10 clear incidents of obstruction of justice by this president, and he needs to be held accountable. I've seen people go to prison for far less.
Well, good evening again from our studios here in New York. And based on the theory that to seem smarter, all you have to do is surround yourself with smart people, joining us tonight for our lead-off discussion, Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post; Claire McCaskill, former Democratic senator from the state of Missouri; Joy Reid, host of AM Joy Weekends here on MSNBC; and Lawrence O'Donnell, who is normally sitting right here or close for this hour, host of the 10 p.m. hour on this network, The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Steve Kornacki is over at the big board. And in Detroit, at the Spin Room, Chris Matthews, the host of Hardball. Chris, I'd like to start with you because home field has its advantages. As a national Democrat said to me after watching all this, I hope they know what they're doing.
Well, last night reminded me of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders as the two main characters fighting off the Bolivian army. Tonight it was more like Gulliver's Travels. I mean, there was Vice President Biden tied down after rope for his long political career. He had to defend every element of it, going back, as Michael Bennet said, back 50 years on issues like busing. It was very hard for him to play defense, but he had a couple of allies tonight. I was surprised on the issue of Obamacare for all. He was joined on that on his side against it by Michael Bennet and by Tulsi Gabbard, who were very strong in his defense. On the same issue, on the issue of decriminalizing border crossings from the southern border, he had a couple of defenders on that issue as well. I thought it was a pretty good divided fight tonight. And I thought, like last night, the issues were border decriminalization of illegal entry and, of course, Medicare for all. Those issues, I thought those were parallel tonight. And I think he had some supporters. But tonight it was clear that over and over and again he was playing defense. And the hardest thing for him to defend in the current climate politically was the deportations. I thought he was hit very hard on that, on the question of, double talk, because he said it was wrong for one of his opponents to change their vote, for Gillibrand to change her vote because of the election. And then right out of nowhere, he got hit on the fact that he was changing his vote on the Hyde Amendment, for example. And so he had so many people coming at him from so many directions. I think it would be very hard for him to be a successful goalie tonight. And I'm sure, but I will say one thing. He was 100% better, or maybe 200% better than he was in the first debate. He seemed to be aware he was in a debate, which was a start for him. And I thought he was reciting a lot of stuff. In fact, a lot of times when he got to the end of his time, it was like he ran out of his recitation rather than his thought. I don't think that looked too good.
Chris, as you know, all of these take on their own character. By tomorrow morning, these events have a funny way of developing, with a boost from social media, their own storyline. We woke up this morning and Williamson was having her moment. As we go to bed tonight, who do you think is going to get that moment among the names that didn't come up in our initial run-through? Is it an Inslee? Is it a Yang, perhaps?
Well, I thought Cory Booker had a pretty good night. I think he took him on. I thought, as usual, de Blasio, the mayor of New York, kept taking these long shots at him. I don't think they were that effective. I think tonight, I'm not sure there was a big winner tonight like last night, Susan Williamson. I think that Marianne Williamson. I think tonight was Biden on defense. That was the story.
Chris Matthews in the Spin Room, where I know a parade of candidates will be making their way to you, and we will go to those interviews live. Back here in the studio, last night we started with the senator because we looked around and she's the only person with that title, and we're going to do so again tonight. Senator, your opinion of what you saw night two?
Okay, so honestly, there were times I wanted to turn the volume down. I care about this deeply.
That's honesty.
I'm really interested in this. But when they were all, I mean, you know, you had Gabbard attacking Kamala, and you had somebody even going to the trouble of attacking de Blasio. You know, it was like, what? And the weirdest thing to me, which I'm having a hard time with, is it a smart strategy to attack the Obama administration? I mean, this is a Democratic president elected twice. I think he's the only Democrat we've had, you know, with the margins he's had since FDR that did that. Remains wildly popular in the Democratic Party.
Wildly popular.
Wildly popular. And the notion that the goal tonight was to attack the Obama administration, I think that could blow up in some folks' faces before this thing is all over. And I got to say this, Biden was a lot better. You know, it was a circular firing squad, and he was in the middle. And it was really, I think he withstood the attacks pretty well, had some wobbles from time to time. But overall, he was much stronger and much more forceful. His delivery was so much stronger than he was in the last debate.
Joy Reid, Joe Scarborough had a good night in that. We heard Julian Castro mention Moscow Mitch before the end of the evening. I've also been following Joe tonight on social media, and I wanted to quote from this. Okay, let me get this straight. Democrats hate Obamacare and hated his immigration policies. What planet are they from? Your reaction.
You know, it's funny. It's rare that the senator and I ever just agree on anything, I think, really. We don't agree that much on policy-wise, but it was weird for me to watch about almost 40 minutes of primarily attacks on the Obama administration's policies. It was odd. It took, I mean, de Blasio made a full-on attack of Obamacare, essentially said we have no working health care system in America. But hello, we have Obamacare. Yeah. So that means the system he's attacking and saying it isn't working is Obamacare. It took until Cory Booker finally mentioned Donald Trump. You finally had a couple of candidates realize that they need to also mention that it is Donald Trump that's trying to take away the health care of 30 million people who got it from Obamacare. So it was an odd strategy to me. It was almost as if we had this debate with the luxury of Hillary Clinton being president, and all we were debating was how we were going to further fix health care. It's almost as if the debate forgot who's president. Because the attacks on Donald Trump, I don't remember his name being mentioned that much. And so it was odd for me for these candidates to debate changes in health care and their different policies on immigration as if Trump doesn't exist. I was expecting at least, you know, I think Cory Booker did it a bit. Hit the president. Donald Trump is supposed to be who you're running against, not Barack Obama.
Eugene Robinson, what do you make of that?
Yes, they were attacking the Obama administration. I mean, they were. Yeah. They spent a lot of time doing that. I think if you're a Democratic candidate for president and you spend your precious time on the debate stage attacking the very popular former president, you're not making. I think you're not making progress. You know, so we've had these two nights now. I think. Last night we saw a couple of people, especially Elizabeth Warren, who are very good at explaining policy, command of every detail, and good at explaining the impact of policies and everything like that. I thought we got much less of that tonight, but we got more of the sizzle, more of the leadership question that we talked about. You got a chance to sort of evaluate these people as potential presidents. You know, to that end, I think Joe Biden certainly did much better than he did in the first debate. I mean, he did not seem ancient. He did not seem out of it. He fumbled a few facts. He a couple of times he said 3 trillion when he meant to say 30 trillion, and he got. But Joe Biden always did that. Joe Biden did that when he was, you know, a young senator, when he was 30 years old. And he was more fluid in his discourse, and he got in a couple of really good zingers, and so I think it was all in all a pretty good night for him, even though he spent it under attack.
Lawrence O'Donnell.
It is in the nature of the Democratic Party to be self-critical because it is always trying to move forward on social policy, which the Republican Party is not. And it is always thinking of social policy from new angles. It is also always trying to move forward on social sensitivities, on issues like racism, on feminism. So if, for example, marriage equality had come up at this debate tonight, and someone pointed out that Barack Obama was once opposed to marriage equality, I would not take that as an attack on Barack Obama. I would take that as an expression of the way thinking in the Democratic Party is constantly moving forward. And so you can look back 2 years, 4 years, and 6 years and say, I think we should do it this way instead of that way. And I now want to do it this way because we did it that way. I mean, Julian Castro at a certain point said something about learning from mistakes that he was part of in the past. And so I think there's an easy overreaction here to the idea that Barack Obama is being attacked. I don't think he felt like he was being attacked. If he was watching this, I think he knows what that is. I do think that they did lose focus once again on Donald Trump. Not in their closing statements, which is quite interesting, right? Because the opening statements and the closing statements are the two things they've prepared. They get a minute for each one. And in those things, they never attacked anybody else on the stage. But in the CNN design of game show of I'm going to raise something that this one said 2 years ago and get you to fight with that person about it, they fell into it and they didn't step above it, most of the time. And that is a format mistake that they really should have thought their way through. And once again, the proof that there is not now and hasn't been for a very, very long time anyone who you would call a leader of the Democratic Party. Because if the Democratic Party had a leader after last night, the 10 people tonight would have all been sat in a room tonight. That's right. And they would have said, remember you're running against Donald Trump. And remember that one of these people, at least one, is going to be on the ticket that you're going to be either on or campaigning for. And don't say anything that makes it difficult for you to campaign for this ticket when you're going to have to campaign for this ticket. And that discipline wasn't there. By the way, I don't think any of them have crossed that line. I think John Delaney can go out and campaign for this ticket. I think they can all still campaign for the ticket or join the ticket. I don't think they're at that spot, but they're veering toward it without that concentration on Donald Trump.
Something else to put in the category of viewer's guide to what we saw tonight. You're allowed to bring in no papers. You can take notes during the course of the debate. Obviously, you can't bring in your phone. Tulsi Gabbard embarked on a multi-count specific attack on Kamala Harris. That means that she came in from the wings with that fresh, and over the course of the evening or several minutes, put down those points in her handwriting contemporaneously to then be able to refer to them during the attack on Kamala Harris, just so you know the forethought that has to go into a multi-pronged attack on one of your fellow Democrats. With that, to Steve Kornacki on the battle, as some have put it, Steve, for the heart and soul of this party going forward.
Yeah, and the question, you guys are starting to talk about it over there. One of the questions raised by what you saw on that stage tonight, how much room, is there room for Democrats to be critical of Barack Obama in this primary campaign, especially as they try to take down Joe Biden, his opponents? We can put some numbers on this. First of all, this probably won't surprise you, but among Democrats, Barack Obama is as close to universally popular as you can find. 97% favorable rating, 3% unfavorable rating. So let's just stipulate that there are basically no Democrats out there who do not have a very high opinion of Barack Obama personally. That said, this is where there's a challenge, I think, for some of these candidates who want to go after his record and, by extension, the Biden record, I think, a little bit. And it's this. Ask this question. Let me show you. This is a recent poll about a month ago of Democratic voters. Do you want to return the country to the way it was under Obama pre-Trump, or do you want to advance a more progressive agenda than under Obama? And you see there's about an even split there, 53% saying a more progressive agenda than you had under Barack Obama. So there is room there, it seems, in some ways to say, you know, hey, Barack Obama had the best of intentions. I liked Barack Obama. He did the best with what he could have. But here's where the administration perhaps fell short, or here's where the circumstances fell short. There may be a way there for these Democratic candidates to do it. By the way, we also talk the particular importance of African-American voters on this question. The opinion is a little different. Return the country to the way it was under Obama. Close to 60% of African-American Democrats saying yes to that. And by the way, we've talked about this too. Who is Joe Biden strongest with among Democratic constituencies? Black voters.
A lot of folks put that question differently. Do you want to win in 2020 or die trying?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.